It took God and the demon to build international cricket, but don't tell Johnny Bairstow. 1882, Australia had played one test in England against the god W.G. Grace, and they sucked. So they were playing him again, and it was a tough wicket. But England was in front, so Australia was desperate for a third innings lead. At number 8 was young all-rounder Sammy Jones. After a routine single, he walks down to do some gardening on the pitch. Grace whips off the bails and appeals. The ball wasn't dead. Jones was run out. The Australians were furious. In fact, some of the English players were also furious. But what Grace said went, and the umpires had already given it. Next in was Fred Spofforth. He was known as the demon fast bowler. He was furious, and he let England know exactly what was coming next, which was maiden. There's 12 maidens. I can't count them all. England only needed 85 to win. W.G. Grace made 32. England only 77. That was the test where the Ashes began. Buy my book, Overthrowing Cricket's Empire, on Amazon today. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Good Areas Live for some podcasts. Me and Estelle, we've got two topics today. We have, the two test matches are about to start. So Australia are playing across genders, across continents. They are playing in Sri Lanka in the men's cricket, which is coming up first, and then against England at home in the women's cricket. So we'll take them in order because that's the way I wrote my notes down, because after I asked Estelle which days they were being played. What's the biggest story out of Sri Lanka? You started with Nasanka injured. Is that the biggest story, Estelle?
I think it has to be, because he's been one of Sri Lanka's better batters in the test game. You know, apart from his endeavors in white ball cricket, he's been one of the better batters over the last couple of series for Sri Lanka. And, you know, that's saying something in a team that has that much experience, right? You've got Angelo Matthews, Dinesh Chandimal, Dimuth Karunaratne at Pathum Nissanka, Kamindu Mendis are the biggest kind of contributors with the bat. Kamindu also had a bit of an injury scare, but fortunately he's back. But we've heard that Pathum will be missing the first test at least.
Here's my big question to you, though, is like how, I don't want to say serious, but so let's imagine there's no World Test Championship.
Mm-hmm.
This series would not be that big of a series without a World Test Championship, right? But this is a situation that because of the World Test Championship, it's almost like this is a smaller deal than it normally would be. And a couple of weeks ago, we thought this might, a couple of months ago, we thought this might be the major series.
Yeah, I mean, when Australia come, there's always a lot of interest in Sri Lanka, even for the test games. I would expect, you know, kind of full houses in Galle for the test. But yeah, you're right. Given that Sri Lanka's hopes of making it to the Test Championship final are gone, probably a little less, less excitement. But I'm told that there is still a chance mathematically. If Australia bowl a hell of a lot of, or they get docked a lot of points for bowling slowly, Sri Lanka can still make it through.
Imagine that. Imagine no one told them that, and that's the thing and they're just like, we've come to Sri Lanka, but we've decided to only use seam bowlers. Everyone off your long run, and you're going to be able to do that. But I love that you're holding on to that one thing. This could be the Sri Lankan series where we have a bunch of retirements, right? This could be the end of Angelo Matthews and Dimuth Karunaratne. If you had to lay your money down, which one are you backing is going to retire first?
It's a tricky one because, I mean, if I were to judge by the player, I think Dimuth would be the one who would retire first, simply because he's said he would repeatedly. I think he wanted to retire before this test championship cycle started anyway, like the current one. And then he was asked to stay on as captain for at least midway through. Angelo, on the other hand, has never really given any hints of wanting to retire. I mean, just a couple of months ago, he was talking about, you know, why Sri Lanka are only playing 4 tests in 2025, right? So if I look at the two players, and that's all I look at, I would say that Dimuth would be the one to retire. But if you look at Sri Lanka's, available resources, they've got a lot of middle order batters who've kind of been knocking on the door. They've got a lot of guys who have done well in the A tours, and wouldn't mind coming in at number 3 or at number 4 or 5 and kind of easing themselves into the lineup. Whereas opening options, you've got Osha Fernando, who's 32, you've got Lahiru Dara, who is 31. Both of them are in this squad. But apart from that, you don't really have that many options. And add to that the fact that Pathum Nissanka has kind of just got into Test cricket. Yes, he's been a mainstay in the ODI and T20 teams, but he's just kind of finding his way in Test cricket. So if you look at what the team needs right now, I would say you'd probably need Dimut to stay on a little bit longer, and maybe you can afford to have Angelo retire. But given the communication by the two players in the past, I wouldn't be surprised if Dimut Karnaratne is the one who announces his retirement. But I mean, we haven't heard anything from either player. So,
see, I wondered if what Angelo Matthews was saying was the opposite, which is, this is my last year in Test cricket and I only get to play 4 Test matches. So I read that or listened to that very differently than you did. The other interesting thing about what he said is he said, the ICC have got to fix this. Well, ICC ain't got nothing to do with Test cricket. Like, Sri Lanka can schedule more Test matches if they want to. So yeah, no, I just thought that was a little bit interesting from that point of view. But yeah, it could be there. Who's been the better or more? No, I'm going to rephrase this. Who's been the more important Test player out of the two?
Of recent times, I think barring maybe the last 1.5 years, I think Dimut Karunaratne has been important just because he opens the batting, right? And you've got so much responsibility on his shoulders. I know overall record-wise, you'd probably rate Angelo as the better batter of the two. But certainly after the retirements of the Sangakaras and Mahelas, Thilan Samaravira, Dimut has been the one who's kind of got runs overseas, done the hard work at the top of the order. While Angelo's had a lot, I mean, he's done well as well, but he's had a lot of support in Dinesh Chandimal and most recently, Kamindu Mendes, and that type of player coming through in the middle order, Dhananjay De Silva as well.
Looking ahead to World Test Championship, obviously this doesn't mean much for Australia, right? Like, they're going to make the final unless they take 8 hours to bowl every over, apparently. That's according to your maths. Next World Test Championship, Australia have a series against India again. So that's quite important that they're playing in Asia, right? And that, they want to use that as a preparation for that India tour as much as anything else. Sri Lanka actually play at home. They play India, South Africa, and Bangladesh. They've been playing some pretty good Test cricket of recent times. So there is an argument to be said that it's almost more interesting from the next World Test Championship status than it is from the current one.
Yeah, and I mean again, because of the World Test Championship, there are no dead rubbers, right? You don't have a series where you can maybe test out
except for this one.
Except for this one, but it's not dead yet. It's not dead yet.
It's
still
dead.
Alive. So there aren't that many opportunities to kind of give your the newer players some opportunities. And if you look at Sri Lanka's, particularly the batting lineup, right? You've got, obviously, as I mentioned, Angelo and Dimut. Then you've got Dinesh Chandimal, who is also in his mid-30s. Dhananjay De Silva, mid-30s. So potentially, you might be seeing, them kind of on the downward trend in the next cycle. So you would think that it's a good opportunity to have some younger players coming in. Like I said, Sri Lanka has been playing a lot of A tours of late. I mean, they've toured South Africa, I think Pakistan as well. So there are few players who could potentially do well. But coming back to the 4 tests this year, it also begs the question how much they want to invest in, those young players and getting them in, because Sri Lanka don't play a lot of Test cricket, right? As we mentioned before. So it'll be interesting in terms for, as you mentioned, for Australia, it's a different thing altogether, right? Because as you said, they are playing India next, and some practice and going by what we've seen in the past, that Galle pitch is going to be catered to spin bowling, and that's more or less what we're going to see in India as well, unless something changes drastically, right? So it would be a good opportunity for them to kind of try things out as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's exactly how they should be thinking about that. So let's talk about some of the Australian choices and chances. I would get you to run through the Sri Lankan squad, but there is 83 people in it, I believe. And so it would take the rest of our life in order to actually go through that squad. But so Australia let's start with the open position. They've already talked about this a little bit. There has been certainly something floated by, whether it be Andrew McDonald or George Bailey, but someone has floated the idea of Travis Head opening. Is that the feeling that we're still getting as the series comes around?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I read on Cricinfo that Travis Head himself had said that he's not sure where he's batting, and that there might be a bit of flexibility in terms of even mid-test, where you have someone opening in the first innings and someone else opening in the second. It's interesting because he doesn't really have a great record in Sri Lanka. I mean, his last series in Sri Lanka, he averaged something like 18 in those tests, batting in the middle order. And we've kind of heard from Australia that they want to use him maybe as that middle order enforcer when they are playing in batting friendly conditions. But in spin friendly conditions, is it more beneficial to have him as kind of that basher at the top of the order before the ball gets soft and it's turning square? So that'll be an interesting one because, like, Constas, I don't think they were expecting him to do what he did, right, against India. And now there is a bit of, there is a discussion as to whether it'll be him or Head. But I think before Constas played the way he did against India, there was a plan that Head would be the one opening in Sri Lanka.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because if this is really, if you're planning for the next India series, which isn't close, by the way, it's 26, 27. I think it might be January 2027. So it's not as if it's about to happen. It's like 2 years away, right? But if you're planning for that series, that's the only test series, I think, between now and then that Australia are going to be playing in Asia, is this Sri Lanka series. And then there is there is the West Indies. So you might get some conditions there. But if you don't play Constas now, you don't learn as much about Constas either. And it's the same with, whereas I think with Head, you kind of maybe guess more or less how this is going to go. But I think it's a really, really interesting one. The other one is Cooper Connolly.
And also remember, Khawaja he won't be there, right, at the next cycle, most likely. So,
I mean, if you really wanted to be prepared for the next 2 years of the World Cup, of the World Test Championship, your best option would be to drop Khawaja and just say to him, we'll bring you back for the World Test Championship final. I know you want to play every test, but we actually need to see if Constas can play spin. And we want to try Head at the top as well. But I can't imagine that would, clearly it's not going to happen. But if you're really using this as a preparation, that's probably what you would do. So the other one is Cooper Connolly, who was a bit of a bolter, although I think we started to get a bit of a clue that he might come in to the squad towards the end. I started getting questions on some of the podcasts about it and some of the lives that we were doing. So people were starting to think that there was a chance of coming. At the moment, Australia has Nathan Lyon, probably Bo Webster, who will bowl some spin, but again is another another off spinner. Travis Head will also bowl some spin, who is again another off spinner. They're going to want a left arm finger spinner, so they either probably and Murphy is over there, but they might not pick Murphy. But they're either going to go with Matt Kuhneman, who has something's going on with his thumb. You're going to have to explain that to me. Or they go with Cooper Connolly, who I'm not sure is actually a frontline bowler. I think he's probably a batter who bowls a little bit, but they might just go with him.
Yeah, Kuhneman, from what I know, dislocated his right thumb, so not his bowling hand, but the other hand. He has been in training. They've been practicing at the Galle Stadium over the last couple of days. So he's been kind of in the full training. But that would be a concern, I suppose, because you need both hands to catch and stuff. But that would be a problem for them if he wasn't fit, right? Because they do need that, or they would think they need a left arm option, particularly because Sri Lanka have so many right-handers in the top 7. I think they have 5 right-handers in the top 7. And as you said, all Australia's kind of part-time options are off spinners. So whether it's Travis Head or Bo Webster, Cooper Connolly, I thought was, just a hard-hitting middle-order bat who could bowl a bit. So I would be interested to see whether then it becomes a question whether it's Bo Webster or him, right?
I mean, at the moment, none of us actually know what Cooper Connolly can be because has he played a first-class game? Has he played like 3 or something?
I think 4 first-class games. Yeah, 4
4
first-class
first-class
games.
games. He's made
He hasn't
309
taken any
runs in those,
wickets.
and it
So
hasn't taken.
no wickets.
He's bowled 96 balls in 4 games.
Mhm.
I mean, to be fair, being a left-arm finger spinner from Perth means you're probably not always going to be used that much to begin with as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just on the left-handers thing, I think that's interesting in general because Australia obviously does have left-handers. And who's the second spinner behind Jayasuriya? Like, Jayasuriya will take some wickets of left-handers, but also will get dumped over the leg side a couple of times. Him versus head could be a lot of fun. Who's the person taking the ball the other way that's going to cause Australia the issue?
I think they will go. I mean, all signs point to Nishan Piris. He's played 1 test against New Zealand in Galle, and he took a 9-wicket haul. He's quite similar to Ramesh Mendis in that he's a tall off spinner who kind of gets a lot of bounce and off spin. But as I said, we haven't really seen him in international cricket barring that one game, right? So that'll be the big question for Sri Lanka as well, because they've got Dhananjay De Silva who can bowl a bit of off spin. But Prabhat Jasur is going to be the main weapon. Just on the matchup kind of thing, I think Todd Murphy has actually a really good record against right-handers in FC cricket. So
I don't think it's in. What the issue with Todd Murphy at the moment isn't that he's not a good bowler to right-handers, because you're right, he is. I think the issue is that if Bo Webster plays, and they've got another off spinner, they've just got off spinners everywhere. Like, I think that's Todd Murphy's bigger problem. They might still. I haven't talked to anyone in the Australian camp, so I don't know how they're thinking, but I think they know what Todd Murphy can do. Again, so I kind of hope that Todd Murphy plays in 1 test match, but I think they're maybe more interested to see if Kuhnemann and Connolly can also add something extra. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right. It's not the perfect matchup situation, but that's kind of where they find themselves at the moment. All right, let's take a break. Oh no, wait, you have to give your prediction.
Oh, my prediction is going to be 1-1.
I thought your prediction was going to be 48 lost points to over
Australia. I think if you read out the names from the squad at the beginning, that's bound to lose sometime.
Yeah, if you went through, well, if you got, what you do is
and
you play
Sri Lanka.
You read the full names and you play Sri Lanka's national anthem after the start of play. Then that's taken up 48 minutes every day. 1-1, okay. I mean, I don't think 1-1. I mean, it partly, to me, depends on how serious Australia's going to take it, right? Because if Australia take it really seriously, I still think they couldn't win 2-0, but I don't think they are. I do think there is an element of them sort of playing ahead and mucking around a little bit here. So I think 1-1 is a fair. I think 1-1 was what I had originally when I was looking at the World Test Championship, and that was when I thought this series would matter, and it absolutely does not matter anymore. And of course, we'll both be watching it because that's what we do. Let's have a quick break here, and then after the break, we'll come back with the women's Ashes test of what Australia's rolling towards 16-0. As an international cricket journalist for 10 years, I tell you what, I have got a collection of international SIM cards that I will never truly understand. Now I find there is a company called Selly who gives you an eSIM, and it makes it all so much easier. So if you're planning on making any trips, download your Selly eSIM app, and you can also get a 15% discount if you say good areas, all one word, at checkout. Travel like a pro with your Selly eSIM today. All right, welcome back. Jarrod, Kimber, Estelle, Vasudevan, or Elise Vasudevan, as you'll see. I renamed her on a recent podcast. But I find this very fascinating. Australia is going to be playing 2 tests at the same time, 2 different parts of the world, 2 different genders, as we said before. That seems like a mistake for Cricket Australia if they want as many people watching the women's test as possible. And this women's test is already under a lot of a grey cloud because of the fact that England have been so entirely shithouse so far in this series. What do you think there's going to be a bit of a do we have to watch the test situation, or do you think it will go okay?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because, as you mentioned, the series has gone so, it's been so one-sided that I don't know if there's anybody who genuinely believes that there might be a different result in the test. And like you said, Sri Lanka, sorry, the men are playing another test as well. The only thing I would say is, stakes are very low, right, in the men's test. So possibly that might be a reason that people watch the women's one, but the men's one's on free to air. So
That I think that's the really interesting thing is that I can't remember any time, and I think someone had written about this, but I can't remember any time a non-Ashes test has been free to air in Australia, unless I'm just I actually. No, even when SBS used to do them, I think they were still Ashes tests. Like, it's not a normal thing to have a tour. Basically, we didn't see many tours in Australia until Foxtel existed, or Optus and Foxtel started existing and started showing cricket overseas. So that's the other thing. It could be great for cricket in Australia, though, because it could just be that you switch between whichever one's more exciting at any particular time. Travis Head's batting, right? You go there. Phoebe Litchfield's batting, you go there, right? Like, you can literally go between whoever you find interesting at a certain point. Sam Culper's come up with this. It's the first non-Ashes tour to be free. It's in 1997. What would the tour in 1997 have been? Anyway, Sandkelp says, normally there are front runners and outliers, but others catch up over time. But the gap between the Australian women and others seems to remain for all these years. Is there a precedent on the men's side or any other sport? So when does Australia's great run really start? 2014, 2015? Yeah. So we're at a decade. So that's not anywhere near as long as the West Indies men's great run, is it?
No, it's not. And the only thing is, I guess now we're watching a lot more of it, in that, the West Indies probably weren't able to watch it around the world, whereas the Australians, even in Sri Lanka, we get the feed, right, to watch the women play. I think that's a major part of it. But yeah, the gap has, I don't know, it's weird. Every time we talk about, other teams are catching up, it's getting more professional. A lot of other players are playing in franchise leagues, and so the quality of cricket is going higher. And then they have a series like this, and then it's back to square one, because England have looked completely out of their depth, right?
Is it possible that Australia has got worse, but England has got a lot more worse?
I think it's possible, because it's very tricky to judge England, right? Because England hasn't achieved anything since that 2017 World Cup win, right? Like, even if you look at the most recent T20 World Cup, but they were certainly front runners with that bowling lineup. They were front runners, and they missed out on net run rate in the end, in a tournament where, with Australia taken out in the semis, it's anyone's game, right? I think it's certainly possible, but also at the same time, that ruthlessness and that drive to get better, you can clearly see with the Australian team, right? Because it's everybody at some point. I think if you look at the ICC T20 team of the year for the women this in 2024, there are no Australians in that side. But
yes, but the other side of that is that the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Award, which is for the best women's player, all formats. Is that right? Yeah. Australia's backup player has been nominated for that, and Annabelle Sutherland. So it's kind of weird the way you look at it, of other teams are catching up, but at the same time, Phoebe Litchfield and Annabelle Sutherland are about to explode and could. Do you know what I mean? Could completely tear cricket up again. So, Sandkelp makes a point. But 10 years is usually more of a generation. I would say there's been a couple of generations of Australian women's players within that, though. So it's not as if, it's not like Warne and McGrath, right? Or Ashwin and Jadeja. It's a bit more than just one generation of players. But it does feel like everyone else is getting closer. But England are not. Just because for fun, what did you think of the... you know what I'm going to say, don't you? What did you think of the Alex Hartley controversy?
Well, I kind of felt for Hartley, because initially when the comment was made about fitness, and I don't know if she called anyone fat. The only kind of comment I saw was that she said some of the players aren't fit and that's holding England back, right?
But
I didn't see anything about being fat. I don't know whether she said that directly. Um,
but
but I think
isn't that sports code for fat?
So I felt like at that point it was a bit unfair, because if you look at just physically, there were only a couple of players she could have been talking about, right? And one of
But
them,
I think that's part of the problem, isn't it? If you don't, if you're going to make a comment like that and you don't say the players you actually mean, isn't that an issue?
I mean, it could be, but like it's one player who you can't drop, like who's not being dropped in any team she plays for, right?
No, agreed. But that's part of the problem. So here's my issue. England did not lose that last World Cup because of fitness.
Yeah.
At all.
No, yeah.
So let me go through this. In this last World Cup, I had a look. Their batting was really good all the way through. Their bowling was about mid, from what I had a look at. So they played 4 games. They beat Bangladesh. They beat South Africa, who were the beaten favourites in the final. Right? They beat England, and then they lost their first game of the tournament, which was the West Indies.
Yeah.
They batted poorly and they made 141. I shouldn't say poorly, averagely, and they made 141. I don't remember watching that innings thinking to myself, oh, they're terrible, they're not fit, or anything like that. Then they came out to bowl, and Hayley Matthews and Joseph, wasn't it, came out and exploded, right? And that was basically the end of the game. By the time Eccleston comes on, the game was almost over, right? Like, and it was because it had happened so quickly. Weren't they like 30 something off the first 3 overs or something?
Yeah.
Like that chase was just the roof was blown off that chase so early on. And Eccleston still comes on, bowls 4 overs, 1 for 23. So my issue is and this is the second time in my lifetime that England women have lost at a World Cup and people have pointed to their fitness. It happened in 2016 as well, right? I don't think in either of those tournaments they lost because of fitness. And so is that just the journalist or the media or the coach? I think it was Mark Robertson back in the day, just pointing to something that can easily be fixed. But isn't the issue here that they're not as good at cricket as Australia? Even if they were the exact level of athletes as Australia, they don't have anywhere near the level of talent at the moment. How can you look at those two sides and be like, oh, fitness is the issue here? I'm not saying fitness isn't different, because the Australian team does look like a completely different kinds of athletes. But what are we talking about here? They're just much better. There are players who aren't even playing for Australia who would be maybe the best seam bowlers for England at the moment.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. When she did make the comments, I was going like, what is she talking about? England lost out on net run rate after playing really well, right? They had one bad game, or maybe one like innings. I think Heather Knight was injured and Siva Brandt was captaining, and it didn't really go that well. So they had like 20 bad overs or 10 bad overs, and they were knocked out of the World Cup. So it was very interesting that was the thing that was being pinpointed. But I want to ask you, did you see the recent comments from John Lewis about culture and fitness?
Yes. So I think this is where I think what Hartley did was fine. I think if you're going to say fitness, you have to name the players. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You have to name the players, especially because fitness is code for fat in cricket, right? So if you are saying fitness, you can't just say, oh, the players aren't fit enough. I think Hartley was wrong, because in that series, that wasn't the difference. Yeah. But it's hard to look at them as athletes compared to some of the other teams and say that they look like for like. So I'm okay with that. But I've talked a lot to Bumble. Bumble is desperate to talk about this story, right? And he hasn't been on TalkSport at a time, and it just hasn't worked. I think maybe me and Alex Shooter might have ended up talking about it, right? But it just didn't work at the time when Bumble was around. We had too many other things to talk about. But what I've been saying to Bumble is you have to remember that you cannot talk about women athletes and men athletes in the same way when we talk about bodies and body images. They carry weight differently, right? And we quite often say, oh, she's not fit. And actually, that's not the case, right? A lot of the tests that we use for men, like what is it, the fat percent, the fat pinches
skin
and
fold.
all that sort of skin folds, they're terrible for men. They're way
Yeah.
worse for women. They just shouldn't be used. I can give you many stories of players passing them where you're just like, well, how has that person passed it and this guy over here hasn't passed it? It doesn't even make any sense. What are we talking about here? It's the same as, when we talked about the South African women and not being able to complete the 2K time trial and all that. Does that mean that Lizelle Lee shouldn't be opening the batting for South Africa? Of course it doesn't, right? So you have to understand what you're talking about with fitness, and you have to understand women's bodies. At the same time, though, to me, it doesn't look like the English women are as professional as the Australian women watching the two teams side by side. It just doesn't look like they're the same levels of professionals. I'm talking about everything, though. That is not just about fitness. That is about preparation and effort in the field, fielding skills, running between wicket skills, and everything. So if it was me, I would be like, I would never use the word fitness. I would say we are watching a professional women's team beat another team that is not professional at the moment. And then privately, I would have gone through all those things with the women.
Yeah, that's what I found interesting about John Lewis's comments as well, because that is something you can say if you are going up against a professional team and you don't have a professional setup. England do have a professional setup, right? And they have the resources and the funding and all of that to reach that level. So then to say that, people are swimming in the sea and kids are playing a lot of sport, and I understand where that's coming from, because Australia is, is a culture centered around sport, right? But you can't say that when your team is has as many resources as they do.
I would assume at the last Olympics they won about as many gold medals as each other. Maybe
exactly.
I can't remember.
England
I think
probably
maybe
won more.
England won more a couple of Olympics before. I think Australia might have taken back over, but it's roughly the same, right?
Yeah.
So we're saying suddenly the fitness doesn't work. Like that is, you have to be honest at a certain point and be like, your professionalism isn't up to the standard that it should be. And I think that's why I would take fitness out of it, because I think once you go fitness, there are a lot of, especially when you're talking about women athletes, you take it in the wrong direction. Are the England women's cricketers doing everything they can to be the top athletes they should be, skill-wise, training-wise, diet-wise, any direction you want to take it? It would be hard to look at their team at the moment and say, yes. So Sandcup says, is a fitness part of the skill level at elite level? I mean, running 2s and 3s, getting caught on the boundary, taking difficult catches, timing the ball at the end of the innings. It's a part, but also having the skills to clear the boundary. Lizelle Lee can clear the boundary, Sandcup, when another player can't, right? So she's clearly not as fit as some other players in the world. So fitness is just one part of it, right? And there are different kinds of cricket athletes that need to be fit. They just don't look like they're as good at any. Like, what's the one thing you've looked at in this series and said that the England players look better than the Australian players? They don't play spin better. They don't play pace better. They don't bowl pace better. Their spin bowling should be better, but Sophie Eccleston can't bowl to the Australians for some reason, right? Their strategies aren't as good. Like if you watch them in the field, Heather is a good captain, but I'm not sure she's better than anything that even the Australian backup captains have been at least on par. Like what part of the game are they better than the Australian team? Forget fitness. I'd be worried about their running between the wickets. And I don't mean whether they can run. I mean, they don't look as sure running between the wickets as the Australian team do. When the Australian batters come out, I'm always struck by the fact that Australia always has that period in the middle of like T20s and one days where they lose extra wickets and you always go, oh. But the reason they do that is because they're pushing the game and every single player who's come out knows what her role is and plays to that. And sometimes I watch England players going, you're just going to have to pull it back for a little while here and you don't know what you're doing. Like just nothing. And that goes back to John Lewis as well. That he is in charge and has been for a while.
Yeah. And, I think the innings that kind of encapsulates that perfectly was Amy Jones. I think it was the third ODI where there was a kind of a tight chase. And Amy Jones has played... Okay, Amy Jones has played 97 ODIs, 117 T20s, 7 tests, right? And she just didn't seem like she knew how to handle that chase with the tail. It just felt like you're watching someone who's new to cricket. And I mean, that might sound harsh, but if you compare the two teams, as you mentioned, it's not just physically, but it's every other aspect where Australia have looked better than England, right? Like if it is just fitness, then maybe your tactics should be better, or your skills with the new ball, something like that. But it is so clearly not just fitness. I think even the fielding, you can't you can't just lay it on fitness, right? It is effort, and it's so much more. Like i- if I was looking at two amateur teams, then you can say, okay, this team has like 10 natural athletes. They come in different sizes, but they're athletic naturally, and this
Mm.
team doesn't. But that's not the case here, right? Like you have two teams that are paid to play. There are professional cricketers, but one, I don't know, you can't make that excuse with the fitness.
No, I agree. And then there's also other things that I wanted to talk to you about as well. So if we move beyond that, in general, just how there is an element, I think, of what's the best way of putting it? There's an element that happens where we are still getting used to. This is the first generation of women cricketers who are professional, and so it shouldn't be smooth, right? Do you know what I mean? There should be players who are not. I mean, there are professional footballers who are not fit enough, right? There are professional basketballers who are not fit enough. There are people who turn up to the Olympics not always in the shape that they should be. Like, these things happen right across all professional sport. And I can understand why we are now starting to take women's cricket very seriously, but the players would probably be looking at the coverage. And I know this is true. It's happened to me. I know it's happened to Raf Nicholson. It's happened to some of my friends. It's probably happened to you. I don't know if you and I have ever talked about it. But the women's sides are much more touchy with criticism than the men's sides. And the reason is no one ever criticized them until a couple of years ago. And suddenly they get to the top level and they're like, and you can imagine someone like Sophie Eccleston's like, I'm the best bowler in the world. Why is anyone questioning anything about me, right? And these sorts of things. Whereas in men's cricket, by the time you have got to the age of Eccleston, everyone has criticized you 1,000 times. Even in your best games, you've been criticized, because that's what happens in men's cricket. So there is an element of the women's cricket where they haven't had the same level of scrutiny. And the first wave of scrutiny they got was kind of a bit sexist, right? Like, you look at the, John Etheridge's comments back in the day, and, Mike Selby's comments, and, a few different people. It was a little bit not understanding what women's sport was, or what women's cricket was at that time. And they've gone from that to this quite full-on criticism from professional journalists, right? You can understand why they would be touchy about that. That doesn't mean that the criticism is wrong, though. And it also doesn't mean that they don't have to learn how to handle it, because that is another level of professional sport. And I felt that the Australian women's team was the first team to really... I remember in 2012 when I wrote about the Australian women's team, and they were very upset because I criticized them as if they were professionals, and they weren't. Right. But I was like, if you're playing in front of me and you're playing for your country, I'm just going to write about you as a cricketer. And they were quite upset at the coverage that they got at that stage. I don't think I've ever had anything from the Australian team ever since. Whereas I've had people from other countries come up and go, "Ooh, that's a bit harsh, isn't it?" Like, that never happens in men's cricket anymore. Like, unless it's a friend of mine who's like, I can't believe you said that, right? Like, you just don't get that very much. You get it in associate cricket. But you don't get it at that level. So there is an element of, even though this is the England women's team, because I'm going to throw this out there. I think because they haven't had as much success since 2017, 2017 to now is the real uber professional period.
Yeah.
And they've been floating as a high level mid-tier team, right? And now, because they're getting the absolute, back a World Cup and then an Ashes, absolutely getting, not making the finals, and now getting smashed everywhere. I think there's a lot of extra criticism that is on them, but they were pretty poor at times at home last summer as well. Like, the Pakistan women pushed them far more than Pakistan should have pushed them. Like, I don't think they've been playing good cricket for a while now, and they're probably a little bit upset at the constant criticism because it's a newer thing.
Yeah, and also you have to look at how you come out, what you bring out to the media as well, right? Like, I mean, John Lewis's comments aren't doing England any favors. I think it's better to accept that you have issues and say that you're working on it, rather than say, no, we have no issues except for the fitness, right? And I think that's when you talk about the Australian professionalism, I think that's something you do see from them, is that if they do have issues, um, you know, in the rare occasion where they've been knocked out of a World Cup, or had bad
Yeah.
runs, that acceptance that okay, something wasn't right, and we are kind of moving towards getting that right. Um, it is like you mentioned, that the fact that you're not accustomed to receiving a lot of criticism, and so you kind of, it's also difficult to filter right now because you're getting criticism from so many different places, and I would think
Yeah.
that criticism coming from a someone who shared your dressing room is probably why it was taken so badly, rather than if it was a, a male commentator, like a guy who's been doing it for years, probably wouldn't have got as much of a reaction as it did, because Alexandra Hartley, was their teammate, and I think has been playing with Sophie Eccleston for many, many years. So
Mm.
it's all part of that professionalism. So it's important that you face up as well when you have issues. I mean, where they are right now at the Ashes, I'm sure they can't wait to get things done with. But then there's going to be that tough period where they have to look at what went wrong, right? And
Mm.
it doesn't start with saying, oh, fitness was the biggest issue and we don't have the sporting culture that Australia has, and that's why we can't compete.
So my issue would be at the moment that I think that Eccleston carries the team. And when they play Australia, she can't carry the team.
Yeah.
Because they play her so well. And in the World Cup, that last World Cup, all the spinners dominated. And so her impact was nullified a little bit more, right? Having watched them for about the last 18 months really closely at times, the amount of times that, like I said, again, even against a team like Pakistan, right? They're going for runs against Pakistan, and then Eccleston comes on and it's game over, right? So the rest of the team don't have to do anything. Because Eccleston and sometimes Sarah Glenn as well, they completely shut it down. And then when they play the teams who play those two better, right, they're just exposed. And that to me is their issue. That is where I would be starting it. I'm not as interested in fitness or anything else. I'm interested in the fact that you're not producing cricketers at the level that you should be. So it's a fascinating one. They'll get smashed in the test match though, right?
I mean, given how everything else has gone, and it being a day-night test in particular, I'm not sure it's going to last, until the last session, or even the last day's play, because the batting just has not done anything, right? Apart from Heather Knight, maybe Natalie Silverbrunt might get some runs, but I mean, if you're an England fan, it's very difficult to figure out how they're going to overcome Australia.
In all truth, do you know what I like about the Women's Ashes format? A lot of people are like, oh, you should play the women's test at the front or the women's test at the end, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that doesn't matter. What I like about it is if you lose, you can lose 16-0, and it sounds more brutal than 5 or 6-0 ever has. Do you know what I mean? It's like, try going home to 16-0 on the scorecard. Like, oh. Sandcup says, following up on your point, how's the Australian public and media response to the far and few losses of Australian women like the last World Cup? The team, look from the looks of the interviews, is that the Australian women are more self-critical. I remember being at the 2017 World Cup when they lost to Harmanpreet Kaur, and I thought at that stage there was almost an element of, I think it was Mott and Lanning were at the press conference, if I remember right, and Mott was trying to push the argument that Harmanpreet just played a fluke innings and there was nothing they could have done. After that, I just felt that they became a really good team at working out when things weren't going right and how they had to keep improving. And we hadn't seen that with all the other women's sides out there at times. And that's a hard thing to get to. So I think when Australia loses a Women's World Cup like that, I don't think it means it's the end of the Australian public, because the Australian public just assume they will win the next one. Right. So it's a very different situation than any of the other teams are in at the moment. But certainly there's a lot to do with the England side out there. Let's go through. I've got a couple of questions I thought we could also answer. Varun's all over it here. Did you see this from Subrat, the Jimmy Neesham drop of Joe Root? My God. That game was wild. I'm going to try and replicate it for you right now, Estelle. I need to find a cricket ball. In fact, I'm going to do it with a plastic cricket ball.
Is this the video that you sent?
Yeah,
Was
but I
that-
sent a
Oh,
terrible
okay.
video and it didn't show it very well.
Yeah.
But let me try and do this. If you're listening on a podcast at home, like, I'm sorry, but you're just on your own. And if you're watching on the YouTube, you now can no longer see my head, but you can see my MS Dhoni jumper. So all these things are great. Jason Behrendorff is bowling. He bowls and Joe Root smashes the ball to the leg side. And Jimmy Neesham's out on the boundary and he takes the simplest catch. It was just a perfect running around the boundary. I've got the ball. I take the catch. And then he's about to either pump his hands or throw the ball up in the air. And as he takes the catch, he hits his leg. The ball goes off his leg for 4. And no one knows what's happening. So instead of just taking the catch and throwing it up, he's like, bang, drops it, and it goes for 4. So the scorer, the TV broadcasters put up wicket, but Jimmy Neesham's got his hands up going, is that out or not out? Joe Root's like, I'm not walking for that. And what Surat said here is, so the ball needs to be in control until a player stops. So the ball needs to be in control is the most important part of this, right? You can take a catch and run around in circles for like 5 minutes if you want to, but once the umpire thinks you are in control of that ball, it's fine. And what the situation with the Neesham one is, he wasn't. He took the catch, and instead of having it in control for the next second and a half, he drops it. And it's the same we saw with Ben Stokes in that test match when he went to flick the ball up and accidentally dropped it. That, again, was one that was correctly given not out. And the Herschel Gibbs one, of course, is the famous one in the 99 World Cup. So you do actually have to be in control of a catch. If you take the ball and you catch it and you flick it straight to the umpire will say that is in control because you flicked it exactly where you were aiming to flick it. In Ben Stokes' case and in Jimmy Neesham's case, they did not flick the ball where they intended to go, and it went in a different direction. So they didn't actually complete the catch. But it was a fascinating one. Also, because Joe Root in that game, so it was a wicket at Pal where I swear, Estelle, I would have taken a 5-wicket haul. Like, it was dragging sideways. The only person who was going to make runs on that wicket was Joe Root, right? Or, like, I don't know, Sunil Gavaskar if he came back. Like, it was such a hard wicket to play spin on. And they've dropped him, and he's gone on to make 77, right? Then he bowled. I think he took like 1 for 25, including bowling 2 overs at the death. So that was the first T20 game in history where all 20 overs were bowled by spin. And honestly, it should have been both innings. I don't know why. I would have just bowled anyone in the first innings. But thank you very much for the question there as well. And just one more here from, God, I can't see it. Tudrum, who says, good morning. We be doing analysis of the miracle in Multan. This is all I will say. If you go back to the podcast I did with Bayram, I said, the problem with making wickets like this is that you put the situation for the opposition to be able to roll you if the toss goes there in their favor or if something fluky happens in the game. I basically predicted this win. Now, having said that, I thought it was going to be more of an issue in the future if they kept doing this rather than this particular West Indies game. But if you go back to both the preview of the first test and the preview of the second test, I was bringing this up at the time. Jamal Warrikan is a really good bowler when the pitch is ragging. And if Gutukesh Modi found any form at all, he was also going to be a very handy bowler on that. Why do you need to make it such a risk? If they were just playing that series normally, no one believes that West Indies wins a test match in that series.
Yeah.
Like, they've made it in such a way that they've given the worst team a bigger chance of winning. I just don't see that at all. Did you watch much of it?
No, I didn't catch much of it, but it's similar to what India have been doing, right? Like making it so extreme that it takes away the advantage you have by having the better spinners. You basically give the opposition, even if they have like the average spinner. And I mean, if you look at Pakistan spinners, they're not the best in the world, right? But you're creating conditions that are so extreme that they're brought into the game. But that also means that the opposition's bowlers are in the game as well.
I think, having seen a lot of Moti and Jamal Warrikan, I think it's probably fair to say that on spinning wickets, there's not that much between the two spinning attacks. But I've seen Warrikan bowl on flat wickets before. I don't think he's anywhere near as good as the two Pakistani spinners on flat wickets, right? Like, I don't get why you would open the game up so much. Anyway, we're not doing the podcast on that one. That will be, I think Michelle is coming over from Caribbean Cricket Podcast to do a special podcast with Bayram. And Michelle was actually in our comment section the other day when I was going nuts about how Pakistan were potentially going to lose the test. I didn't even review the first test. Estelle, all I did was say, this is such a dangerous theory and I wouldn't do it. And here's why. And then it happened straight away. I sound like a bigger genius than I deserve to, because realistically, I was thinking that it was the future test series more than anything else. But I should say this, I did back West Indies in both test matches, because I thought one toss goes your way and suddenly you've got a huge chance. Anyway, we'll probably be back after the, we might do another podcast, me and Estelle, after the 2 tests are played. We'll see how they all go and how we're feeling with all that sort of stuff. Abdullah says, you're forgetting Abrar. Well, you're forgetting Kevin Sinclair. Imagine being outbowled by Kevin Sinclair. But thank you very much to everyone for coming into the chat and everything else today. We'll be back again very soon. We've got a big feature tomorrow, which me and Estelle both worked on. She's about to look weird. She might be like, did I work on this piece? I think you worked on this piece. We just finished a big piece on Annabelle Sutherland, which will be up on the main channel tomorrow. Did you work on that piece or did I just say that?
No, I just gave Shayan the idea, or one of the ideas he used.
There we go. So basically, Estelle saying that Shayan did no work and that she did everything there. But thank you very much to everyone, and we'll see you again very soon on the Good Areas podcast. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that. Like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with. And also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire, but what happens when those nations grow up and get good at it? Find Overthrowing Cricket's Empire on Amazon today.